is like these high-level, supposedly things where you've got human skulls that are made into wine cups, and you ceremonial drink wine. And then there's Yab Yum, where you have a consort, right? Married Buddhist monks, married lamas. And of course, in Tibet, the lamas were also the government. We always forget that the Dalai Lama is a sweet little religious leader, and he is. But in Tibet, the Dalai Lama had police and an army. And I remember reading about the Dalai Lama before him when Alexander David Neal knew him. And he had like a bodyguard of 100 guys with rifles. And a lot of the lamas would also be the local lords. Sort of like the way in Protestant Europe, you would have prince bishops. Someone would be the prince of the town, but also the bishop of the town. Combining these roles. And again, not overly Buddhist. Not overly Buddhist. If nothing else, Buddhist monks are forbidden from wearing hats. They're forbidden to wear hats of any sort. And man, some of those hats they have are just amazing. So, this is all very flashy and interesting. But when you actually look at the Theravada, which is the closest thing we have to what the Buddha would recognize a Theravadan monk, I think. He would say, aha, that's a monk. I don't think he would recognize a lama or a Japanese Buddhist priest, Buddhist monk. Very often they just wear like a little tiny orange sash. The Tibetans wear all kinds of amazing costumes and follow all sorts of things. The Theravada bhikkhu is still trying to live according to the rules that the Buddha laid down for the behavior of monks. They keep their precepts, they keep their vinaya, which are the monastic rules, and of course some of them are sloppier than others, but it's basically the same path, and it doesn't have anything much flashy to it. There aren't any of these wrathful Buddhist deities or cosmic space bodhisattvas that will suddenly appear before you and throw you a few Buddhist miracles. No, it's just work on yourself so that you don't suffer, and it works. The Buddha says, don't believe me, try it and see what your results are. And if you like the results, keep going. If you don't like the results, that's okay. You don't have to. Nobody's holding a gun to your head. But if you want to end your suffering, if you want to get better control over your mind, and the better control you get over your mind, the less you suffer. Because so much of our suffering, all of our suffering, really, not our pain, that we are always going to have pain, but the suffering, the thoughts we have about these things, this is under our control if we want to do the work to get it under our control. And that, to me, is what Buddhism really is all about. It's not about chanting. It's not about incense. It's not about, costumes and little prayer wheels and like the human thigh bone, trumpets and all that kind of wacky stuff. That catches your eye. There's a lot of gimme Buddhas out there. They go, gimme. I'll just say this Buddha's name and I'll get reborn in this place. It's interesting. I think there was a when the Buddha was asked about miracles. One of his guys was like, yeah, you're the Buddha. Why don't you do some miracles? That would really convince these guys to follow the Dhamma. I mean, you've got all these psychic powers you developed, right? The Buddha was like, first of all, you get psychic powers from doing this stuff sometimes, but it's secondary. It's not really an important part of the path, and it's really a distraction. He says, the other thing is, if you go around doing miracles and pull this stuff off, he says, first of all, people are going to say, well, he doesn't have any good arguments if he has to do miracles. He says he wants people to come to the Dhamma because they understand it, because they understand it's the best thing that they can do for themselves if they want to end their suffering. And if they don't want to end their suffering, hey, people like to suffer, fine, suffer. That's not for them. That's not what we're just talking about, how people can get control of their own minds. He says, the other thing is, if I do miracles to convince people, they're going to say, hey, how did you do that? Maybe it was a trick. There'll always be people who say, well, it was just a trick. And it's like, so he says, stay away from miracles. They're not really important. They're a distraction. And you probably heard my story about the guy who was he was an ascetic and he had a guru, and it's like, He's always doing all these ascetic practices and meditating and standing on his head and doing all this stuff. He was going to decide he wanted psychic powers. And you can do these yoga exercises just to specifically to develop psychic powers. So he spent like 20 years doing these austerities and things. And finally, he was able to walk across the river. So he goes to his guru and says, look, my guru, after 20 years of horrible asceticisms, look, I can walk across the river. And he walks out on the river and he walks back again. And the guru says, you are a great fool. All of your friends and neighbors have been crossing the river for a half a penny on the ferry all this time. And you've been sitting in the forest hurting yourself just so you can, congratulations, you saved half a penny. You are a great fool.
Yeah. I remember you actually telling me that at one time. It was a while back, but
yeah, that's an oldie.
Now, you mentioned something that really stuck out to me, because it's like when you were talking about having like bowls made of skulls. Now,
yeah,
that reminds me of the bond. Now, how is the bond related to some Buddhist beliefs? Because I know they have a part in that whole.
Well, the Bon are the Bonpo, as they're called sometimes. The Bonpo they consider themselves to be the indigenous religion of Tibet, sort of the way the Shinto priests are the indigenous priests in Japan. Mm-hmm. So when Buddhism came in, there was friction between the two, but nowadays a lot of people follow something they call the two ways together sort of thing, so that they're Shintoists and Buddhists, and a lot of Shinto priests also act as Buddhist priests and vice versa. So they actually have a unified worship, but they still stay distinct. I know animists in Japan. They go to the Shinto temple, and it's like most people go to church around here. It's not it's not a huge part of their life, but they go in, they do the ceremonies and this and that. And some people differentiate, but even most Buddhists in Japan, I think, also take care of the Shinto deities as well. In Tibet, the Bon they consider themselves to be the indigenous religion that was there before Buddhism. The thing is, Buddhism has very much affected the Bon, so and again, I'm not an expert on them at all, but the impression I got from what little I know is that as Buddhism became more and more relevant and more dominant in Tibet, the Bon priests were like kind of marginalized. So a lot of the Bon ritual and stuff tends to ape the Buddhists, except they do it backwards. So like Buddhists tend to use a swastika that rotates to the left. They use one that rotates to the right. Buddhists wear ochre robes in Tibet, like orange and red. The Bon wear black robes. The Buddhists bear this shoulder, they bear the other shoulder, just to say, see, we're different from the Buddhists, which I think is the main thing, is to differentiate themselves and also say, oh, we've been here much longer, we're the original religion. Now, when the Germans in the 1920s and 30s, who were very interested in ancient Indo-Aryan, or as we say now, Indo-European mythology, went to Tibet, they discovered the Tibetan Buddhists that they were very interested in, but then they found the Bon, who they were looking for the oldest thing they could find. The Bon, that we've been here for thousands of years before those latecomer Buddhists. This is the way you really use a swastika. Well, I think that explains in part my own personal theory of why certain German nation decided to use a certain direction in their use of a famous symbol. But so the Bon were there first. But I really think that they're, like the Buddhists circumambulate holy places one way, the Bon do it the other way. It's very reactive. So in that sense, Buddhism has really affected them quite a bit. And of course, a lot of the Bon beliefs, the Buddhist, the Tibetan Buddhist ideas that are shamanic in origin, a lot of those shamanistic ideas are very prevalent in the Bon as well. I don't really know a lot about their religion as such, but I know that, it still continues in Tibet and in exile as well to this day.
I always did find that pretty interesting, because it was easy for me to comprehend with the Christian beliefs, how they were always broken down into denominations and stuff, but it really just blew me out of the water when I found out that Buddhism was like that as well,
Oh yeah.
And,
oh yeah.
It just, And you were mentioning Shinto as well. When
Yeah.
you now have you learned much about stuff like Mount Fuji and stuff of that nature? Because that's something that I was always interested. I've gotten more interested in mountain worshiping when it comes to Buddhism and shamanism. When it the whole connection there.
Well, I don't know much about it. I talked to my brother once who lives in Japan about Fujiyama, um, because the Yama suffix denotes a spirit. But he didn't know offhand anything about Fuji being regarded itself as a spirit. On the other hand, I just don't know. But his partner is a Shintoist. Maybe we could get her onto the show one of these evenings to talk about it.
That would be
Um,
that would be awesome.
she might know more, but again, she's not a theologian or anything like that. She's just somebody that goes to her temple once in a while and does again, I don't really know, but I get the impression that she probably has about the same ideas of her same theological level as the average Christian or Buddhist for that matter. Um, but she might have some insights that would be cool. I'll talk to them about that.
Should have more than I do. I'll put it to that way.
Yes, she certainly would, and more than me as well.
You
I
know,
just don't understand it. But
I was really interested in the Shinto though because like I told you before how I noticed like the suicide forest and everybody's so mystified about that. For the longest time I was hearing about this forest, okay, and I couldn't connect the dots to it until I finally did research on it, and I found out that this forest is just below Mount Fuji, okay,
uh-huh.
and they make it out like all of these people just for some reason goes to this forest and they have no idea why they go there, and I started doing research into the Shinto and their mountain worshiping practices, and I found out that Mount Fuji is a big part of that, and also that there was another mountain that was also used as well, where they were doing the same thing with elderly people.
Huh.
Like elderly people would go and they would allow their family members to take them to this mountain and just abandon them.
Huh. Interesting.
And they, you know what I mean? And they, like, it really woke me up to a lot of that stuff. It really,
Was that in Japan?
yeah, it was in Japan.
Ah, I'll ask my brother about that. That's interesting.
It was very, very interesting how that all played out. Like they would literally abandon their elderly on this mountain.
Right.
And then like you take a look at this forest. I don't know the proper name for it. I just call it suicide forest. But
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
but it was really weird. It was kind of freaky because I know how dark a lot of their old lore is. Like they have some pretty dark like folklore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Believe it or not, it actually is pretty like that one. It's the really bad one where the the girl ghost with the black hair, and you know what I mean, the one that sneaks up on you and crawls up your shirt. That's actually rooted into like old like Japanese.
I know. It sounds like some Saturday nights I've had.
Yeah, I don't even like talking about it right now. I'm getting chills up my back just trying
That's the
to.
one that comes up to the television set.
Yeah, no, that's the well. That one's bad too.
Or the ring, or
The
was it
the,
well?
the ring, the ring. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that one's bad too.